The endless night shift. Elias clutched his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste barely registering against the rising tide of dread. He was the only one left in the sterile office building of Apex Solutions. Normally, the late-night shift meant quiet, a chance to catch up on work without the usual office chatter. Tonight, however, the silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. It all started subtly, a misplaced file here, a flickering light there. Then the whispers began, barely audible at first, like the wind sifting through forgotten corners. They seemed to call his name, a chilling murmur that sent shivers down his spine. At first, Elias dismissed them as exhaustion, remnants of a long week. Tonight, however, the whispers were a chorus, swirling around him in the darkened office. He slammed his laptop shut, the sudden click echoing in the vast emptiness. No, he wouldn't let this get to him. He grabbed his phone, but the signal was dead, another unsettling occurrence. There was no way he could call for help, trapped in this ever-growing darkness. As Elias fumbled for a light switch, a flicker at the end of the hallway caught his eye. Curiosity, laced with a sliver of fear, propelled him forward. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered, the familiar doors replaced by blank, featureless panels. The whispers grew louder, urging him closer to the flickering light. Pushing open a door, Elias found himself not in another office, but in a dusty room filled with archaic computers. A single, flickering monitor displayed a cryptic message. The night shift begins. A wave of nausea washed over him. This wasn't normal. Panic, raw and primal, clawed at his throat. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow, it radiated an otherworldly chill. It spoke, not with its mouth, but in a voice that seemed to emanate from within Elias's own head. "Welcome, Elias," it rasped. "You are the final key." Terror paralyzed Elias. This wasn't a prank, not a nightmare. This was something else entirely. Somehow, the office building had become a twisted labyrinth, a hunting ground for this entity that preyed on his deepest fear, loneliness. He stumbled back, desperate for escape. But every door he tried led him back to the main hall. Only the layout seemed to shift, morphing into a maze with no exit. Hours blurred into days? Or was it nights? He was exhausted, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. The whispers returned, taunting him with visions of his loved ones, forever out of reach. Just as he was about to succumb to despair, he found a hidden compartment in the dusty computer room. Inside was a worn diary, filled with frantic scribblings. It belonged to a previous night shift worker, trapped and driven mad by the same entity. The final entry mentioned a key and a cryptic sequence of numbers. Hope, fragile and flickering, sparked within Elias. He ran back to the first flickering monitor, his heart pounding in his chest. Typing in the sequence, the screen flashed, revealing a hidden passage within the seemingly blank wall. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed through the opening, finding himself in a sterile white room. A lone computer sat in the center, its screen glowing softly. On the screen was a single image, a digital clock frozen at midnight. A wave of understanding washed over him. This office building wasn't just a place of work. It was a doorway, activated every night by the clock striking 12. He had to break the loop. Remembering the archaic computers in the dusty room, he raced back, a plan forming in his mind. With trembling hands, he accessed the system, searching for a way to override the clock. Finally, he found it, a program labeled Daybreak. With a deep breath, he ran the program. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, filled with rage. Then, a blinding white light erupted, banishing the shadows and silencing the whispers. When Elias opened his eyes, he stumbled out into the familiar lobby, bathed in the morning sunlight. He was free, but the memory of the terror lingered, a chilling reminder of the nightmarish world that lurked beneath the mundane. As he stepped out into the bustling city, he knew that others might take his place, their fears exploited by the entity that resided within the seemingly ordinary office building. He vowed to warn them, but his words seemed lost in the cacophony of the city, the weight of his experience too unbelievable to share. He tried to resume his life, but the trauma of his experience gnawed at him. The office, once a symbol of monotonous routine, became a menacing monument to the horror he barely escaped. He requested a transfer, desperately seeking a change of scenery. Weeks turned into months, the fear a constant companion. Then, one night, he woke up with a jolt, a cold sweat clinging to his skin. The whispers were back, faint at first, but growing steadily. Panic clawed at his throat as he realized the nightmare hadn't ended. He looked at the clock on his nightstand, 11:58 p.m. His heart pounded like a drum solo. He knew what was coming. He grabbed his phone, frantically searching for information about Apex Solutions. He found nothing. Desperate, he typed in the cryptic message from the diary. The night shift begins. A single result popped up in a forum hidden on the dark web. Hesitantly, he clicked on it. The forum was filled with chilling testimonies of people who had experienced the same terror within the office building. Most spoke of a slow descent into madness and a sense of being trapped in a time loop. But one post caught his eye. It was from the previous night shift worker whose diary he found. The last entry, dated weeks after his escape, spoke of a recurring dream, a white room with a frozen clock. The final sentence sent chills down Elias's spine. It isn't over. The key is in the dream. A horrifying realization dawned on him. Breaking the loop wasn't enough. He had only delayed the entity's capture of the final key. He was the key. The entity wanted to use his fear to open some unknown door, unleashing something far more terrifying. He couldn't let that happen. He had to find a way to sever the connection to truly break free. With newfound determination, he scoured the forum, searching for answers. He found a single clue, a symbol mentioned in some posts, a crudely drawn eye with a teardrop. It seemed like a long shot, but it was all he had. The next day, he returned to the office building, pretending to need something from his old desk. His heart pounded in his chest as he roamed the familiar halls, searching for the symbol. Finally, he spotted it etched faintly on the underside of the hidden passage doorway. With a trembling hand, he traced the symbol. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and the world around him shimmered. He found himself back in the white room, the frozen clock staring at him with an almost mocking intensity. This time, however, he wasn't alone. The entity stood before him, a skeletal figure cloaked in darkness, its yellow eyes burning with malevolent hunger. It spoke again, its voice a cacophony of whispers. The key unlocks the gate, it rasped. Let the darkness in. Elias, fueled by a desperate defiance, remembered the forum posts. Several mentioned moments of clarity during their ordeal, glimpses of their past lives. He closed his eyes, focusing on a memory, his daughter's laugh, the warmth of her small hand in his. Suddenly, the whispers faltered, replaced by a deafening silence. When he opened his eyes, the entity was gone. The air crackled with a strange energy. Then, he noticed a crack forming on the surface of the frozen clock. Started small, then grew rapidly, spiderwebbing across the glass. Panic surged through him. Was this it? Was he breaking free? Or was he unleashing something worse? With a shattering sound, the clock face broke apart. Instead of the expected flood of darkness, however, a blinding light erupted from within. Elias shielded his eyes, but he couldn't help but peek. In the blinding light, he saw a figure, not menacing but ethereal, radiating warmth and compassion. The figure spoke, its voice a gentle melody. You have chosen love over fear, it said. The gate remains closed. You are free. As the light faded, Elias found himself back in the office lobby, the morning sun streaming through the windows. He stumbled out, weak but alive. The whispers were gone, replaced by the sounds of the city waking up. He looked back at the office building, now bathed in ordinary sunlight. It looked almost harmless, He walked away, knowing the experience had changed him. He wouldn't forget the horror, but he wouldn't let it control him. The whispering woods. The rusted gate groaned open, its rusty hinges screaming a protest against the intrusion. Sarah, at the wheel of their beat-up Jeep, swallowed hard. The headlights sliced through the thick darkness, revealing a path swallowed by overgrown foliage. "Are you sure this is the right way, Mark?" Mark, ever the optimist, grinned. "Relax, Sarah. It's called an adventure for a reason." Beside him, Emily, Sarah's younger sister, bounced excitedly in her seat. John, the quiet one of the group, simply stared out the window at the oppressive forest, his brow furrowed in a mixture of skepticism and apprehension. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, revealing a sight that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. A ramshackle cabin, perched precariously on a windswept hilltop, loomed darkly against the fading light. Smoke curled from its crooked chimney, a lone wisp of defiance against the encroaching night. The windows were boarded shut, giving the cabin a dead stare, as if it was watching them with unseen eyes. "Whoa, is that our cabin?" Emily whispered, her voice barely a squeak. "It looks creepy," John muttered, his voice barely a rasp. Mark, oblivious to the unsettling ambience, hopped out of the Jeep with his usual enthusiasm. Finally, fresh air. He bounded towards the cabin, the rest trailing behind hesitantly. The closer they got, the clearer the feeling of wrongness became. The wood seemed to groan under their feet, and the air hung thick with a stale, oppressive smell. A crow circled overhead, cawing harshly. Pushing open the creaking door, they were met with dimness and a musty smell that seemed to cling to them like a second skin. Cobwebs draped from the rafters like ghostly tapestries. Furniture was shrouded in dusty sheets, and a single flickering lantern cast long, skeletal shadows that danced on the walls. In the corner, a dusty rocking chair creaked back and forth, seemingly of its own accord. Sarah shrieked, jumping back as if burned. Mark chuckled nervously, while John simply raised an eyebrow, skepticism battling with a flicker of unease in his eyes. Emily, wide-eyed, whispered, "Did you see that?" The weekend that stretched before them, what they had hoped would be a relaxing getaway, was quickly turning into a nightmare. Strange noises echoed through the night, waking them with jolts. Sarah swore she saw fleeting shadows flit past the boarded windows. Missing items, a watch here, a phone charger there, added to the unease. One afternoon, while exploring the woods behind the cabin, a place that felt denser and more oppressive with every step, they stumbled upon an old, weathered journal tucked away beneath the gnarled roots of a giant oak. Its brittle pages spoke of a family who once lived in the cabin, a father, a mother, and a young daughter named Lily. The entries, written in a spidery hand, grew increasingly frantic, mentioning strange noises, disappearing animals, and a chilling feeling of being watched. The final, scrawled message simply read, "They hunger." The discovery of the journal sent a cold shiver down their spines. It felt like a confirmation of their growing unease, a chilling whisper of a darkness lurking within these woods. Panic started to gnaw at their sanity. John became withdrawn, convinced they were being stalked by unseen entities. Mark's cheerfulness faded, replaced by a tense silence that hung heavy in the air. Even Emily, usually bubbly and optimistic, looked pale and scared. Suspicion crept in like a poisonous fog. Sarah found John one night, burning the journal in the fireplace. He accused her of trying to scare them all with spooky stories, his eyes wide and wild. Mark, ever the mediator, tried to calm them down, but the trust was gone. The camaraderie that had brought them together was now frayed at the edges. That night, as they huddled around a dying fire, the crackle of the flames the only sound breaking the oppressive silence, a blood-curdling scream shattered the uneasy peace. It was Emily's voice, filled with raw terror, echoing through the cabin and out into the dark woods. Panic turned to terror. Sarah and John scrambled to their feet, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Sarah grabbed a rusty poker from beside the fireplace, her hand trembling. John, his face pale as a ghost, snatched a lantern that sputtered and flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They charged out into the night, the forest a chilling maze of darkness punctuated by the faint glow of the moon filtering through the thick canopy of leaves. Emily's scream had come from somewhere behind the cabin, towards the dense woods that seemed to swallow any light that dared enter. Sarah and John stumbled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces, fear urging them forward even as reason screamed at them to turn back. They found Emily's abandoned backpack beneath a twisted old tree, its contents scattered around a flashlight, a half-eaten granola bar, a crumpled map. John, his voice choked with fear, pointed to a set of fresh footprints leading deeper into the woods. The prints were large, impossibly large, and unlike anything human. A low growl echoed from the darkness, sending shivers down their spines. It was a primal sound, filled with a hunger that made Sarah's blood run cold. John, his face etched with terror, grabbed her arm. "We need to get out of here," he shouted, his voice hoarse. But it was too late. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and gaunt with eyes that glowed an unnatural red in the moonlight. It moved with a predatory grace, its long limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Sarah screamed, the sound swallowed by the vast expanse of the forest. John, in a moment of desperate bravery, shoved Sarah out of the way. She stumbled and fell, the forest floor a cold, unforgiving surface beneath her. She watched in horrified slow motion as the creature lunged at John, who let out a choked scream before disappearing into the darkness with the entity. Alone, Sarah scrambled to her feet, tears streaming down her face. The world spun around her, the darkness pressing in from all sides. She knew she had to run, to escape this nightmare. But in which direction? The woods were all the same, an endless maze of towering trees and tangled undergrowth. She ran blindly, her breath coming in harsh gasps. The chilling growl echoed behind her, urging her on. She tripped and fell, scraping her knees on the rough ground. But she didn't dare stop. With a surge of adrenaline, she forced herself back on her feet and continued running, the sound of her own heartbeat a frantic drum in her ears. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the trees, Sarah stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a towering oak, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Beneath the oak, partially hidden by leaves and debris, was a small wooden door set into the ground. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. Exhausted and desperate, Sarah hesitated for a moment. But with nowhere else to go, she gathered her remaining strength and pushed the door open. A musty smell greeted her, along with a feeling of stale air that had been trapped for centuries. She clambered down a rickety wooden ladder, the darkness swallowing her whole. The air grew colder, and the smell of mildew intensified. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the bottom and found herself in a narrow tunnel. Panic welled up inside her again. Had she made the right choice? This could be another trap, another part of this horrifying nightmare. But there was no turning back now. She lit a crumpled lighter she found in her pocket, the flickering flame casting grotesque shadows on the damp walls. The tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinth carved into the earth. As she walked, she began to hear whispers. They were faint at first, just barely audible, but they grew louder with every step. They seemed to come from all around her, spoken in a language that was both alien and strangely familiar. The whispers spoke of hunger, of darkness, of ancient pacts made in blood. They spoke of a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin, and where terrible creatures feasted on the souls of the unwary. A sudden cold wind extinguished the lighter, plunging Sarah into complete darkness. Terror choked her, the whispers now deafening in her ears. She stumbled forward, her hands outstretched, feeling her way through the oppressive darkness. Then, a faint light flickered ahead. Hope surged through her, a spark in the overwhelming darkness. As she stumbled towards it, the whispers grew fainter, replaced by a sense of chilling silence. The light led to a large cavern, its walls adorned with strange symbols that glowed with an eerie luminescence. In the center of the cavern, a single figure stood shrouded in darkness. As Sarah approached, the figure turned, revealing a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Don't be afraid, child," the woman said, her voice soft and soothing. "You are safe here, for now." Sarah, overcome with relief and exhaustion, collapsed on the cavern floor, tears streaming down her face. The woman knelt beside her, offering her a water skin. As Sarah drank, the woman explained the history of the cabin and the surrounding woods. Many years ago, a dark ritual was performed in this very place. A group of men sought power by opening a gateway to another dimension, a realm teeming with monstrous entities. The ritual backfired, unleashing horrors upon the land. The woman, revealed to be a descendant of a lineage tasked with guarding the gateway, explained that the whispers were the whispers of the creatures trapped on the other side, forever hungry for souls. The cabin, built above the sealed gateway, served as a conduit for the dark energies. It attracted those with darkness in their hearts, manipulating them and fueling the entity's hunger. The journal Sarah found belonged to the previous guardian, who failed to contain the growing threat. John, Sarah learned with a pang of grief, had most likely been dragged through the weakened seal, his fear and despair granting the creatures a temporary foothold. Sarah, initially skeptical, understood the truth as the woman pointed towards a faint glow emanating from beneath the oak tree above. The seal was weakening, and the whispers were growing louder. The woman explained there was a way to strengthen the seal, a dangerous ritual requiring a potent offering. Hesitance flickered across Sarah's face. She had lost John, Emily's fate remained uncertain, and now she was being asked to risk her life. Yet, the thought of the ravenous creatures escaping into the world, the destruction they could unleash, filled her with a fierce resolve. The ritual, the woman explained, needed a personal belonging of the person taken by the creatures. It was a heartbreaking choice, but Sarah offered Emily's favorite necklace, a small silver butterfly with chipped wings. Together, they performed the ritual, chanting ancient words that resonated deep within the cavern. The cavern filled with an eerie light, the symbols on the walls pulsing with energy. Sarah braced herself, expecting a terrifying backlash. However, the light intensified, then began to recede, pushing back the darkness emanating from beneath the oak tree. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah collapsed onto the cavern floor. The woman offered her a small, comforting smile. "The seal is stronger now," she said, "but the darkness still remains. This may not be the last time it needs tending." A heavy weight settled in Sarah's stomach. This burden, she realized, might be hers to carry now, but for now she had survived. The woman led her back to the tunnel, the way back illuminated by a faint, bioluminescent glow emanating from the cavern walls. Emerging back into the world, Sarah found herself bathed in the golden light of dawn. The whispers were gone, replaced by the chirping of birds. Relief washed over her, so intense it almost made her knees buckle. The cabin, now devoid of its ominous aura, looked almost welcoming in the morning light. But Sarah knew the true horror that lurked beneath its surface. With a shudder, she turned away, leaving the cabin and its dark history behind. The road back was long and arduous. Sarah flagged down a passing truck, the driver's concerned look a stark contrast to the horrors she had just faced. She never spoke of the cabin, the whispers, or the woman in the cavern. It was a secret she would carry, a burden of knowledge that would forever taint her memories of that fateful weekend getaway. Life went on, but it was different now. The shadows held a deeper meaning. The wind carried echoes of whispers, and the silence sometimes felt pregnant with something darker lurking just out of sight. Sarah carried a newfound responsibility, a guardian of a secret, forever vigilant against the darkness that slumbered beneath the whispering woods. Fractured memories, a descent into the labyrinth. Anna's eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping her lips. White walls, stark and sterile, surrounded her. Panic clawed at her throat. Where was she? Who was she? Faces flickered in her mind. A gentle man with warm eyes, a child with laughter like tinkling bells. But their names, their connection to her, remained a frustrating blur. A cold sweat trickled down her back. As she stumbled out of bed, the floor solidified beneath her bare feet. Down a sterile white corridor she walked, the fluorescent lights casting an inhuman glow. The sterile silence amplified the pounding of her heart. This sterile landscape stretched on endlessly, offering no answers, only deepening the chilling void in her memory. Then a flicker, a doorway materialized in the white wall, beckoning like a half-forgotten dream. Anna, her curiosity battling her fear, cautiously approached. A gust of cool air swept out, carrying a whisper of forgotten warmth. Hesitantly, she stepped through. The sterile white was replaced by a swirling kaleidoscope of colors. A playground materialized, the sounds of children's laughter echoing in her ears. A little girl, with pigtails the color of spun sunshine, chased a red ball across the grass. "Mommy!" the girl shrieked, her voice filled with childish joy. Anna's heart ached with a bittersweet pang, a memory, fragile and fleeting, of holding that small hand in hers. Yet the name remained just out of reach. Was this real or a cruel trick of her mind? The scene morphed, twisting into a scene of domestic bliss. At dinner table, a man with kind eyes smiled at her across a steaming plate of spaghetti. Laughter and warm conversation filled the air, but the faces remained nameless, their connection to her shrouded in a heavy fog. Desperate, Anna reached towards them, but her hand passed through the scene like smoke. The laughter dissipated, replaced by a chilling silence. Tears welled in her eyes as the scene dissolved, leaving her alone in a swirling vortex of colors. She found herself in a dark and dusty library. The air hung heavy with the smell of old paper. Glowing books lined the shelves, their titles obscured by swirling shadows. As she approached a book, the words shimmered into view. The forgotten past. With trembling hands, she opened the book. The pages were blank, yet a voice, raspy and ancient, echoed in her mind. "This is your story, Anna. Remember, or be lost forever." Panic seized her. This voice, this book, held the key to her identity. She had to remember, but as she flipped through the pages, a sense of dread gnawed at her. Nightmares bled onto the blank pages, one by one. A car crash, the screams of a child, a blinding flash of light. A hospital room, sterile and cold, the smell of disinfectant sharp in her nostrils. A doctor's voice, heavy with regret. "We did everything we could." But the voice was drowned out by a maddening scream. It was her own scream, echoing through the corridors of her mind. The horrific scene replayed, a loop of her worst nightmare. The joy of motherhood, the love of a husband, all ripped away in a heartbeat. Grief, raw and agonizing, engulfed her. But amidst the pain, a flicker of recognition. The faces in the sterile white room, her husband, her child, their names a desperate plea on her lips. "Mark, Sarah, please." The scene morphed again, this time to a sterile white room. A woman strapped to a bed, her eyes wide with terror. A doctor, his face obscured by darkness, spoke, his voice laced with a chilling indifference. "The experimental therapy is working. We're erasing the trauma, building a new reality." A new horror dawned on Anna. This labyrinthine journey through her mind wasn't just a memory loss. It was a deliberate erasure, a desperate attempt to escape the pain of the car crash. But at what cost? The voice in the book returned, mockingly. "Face it, Anna. Without the pain, there is no you. Stay lost, or embrace the darkness and remember." Tears streamed down her face. The choice was stark: remain in this fabricated world, devoid of pain but also devoid of love, or confront the horrific memories and reclaim her true self. A single tear fell onto the blank page of the book, leaving a shimmering stain. In that moment, a flicker of resolve ignited within her. Taking a deep breath, she faced the next page. She would dive back into the abyss of her memories, no matter the pain, to reclaim her past, her identity, and perhaps a way. The memory unfolded like a gruesome flower. The mangled wreckage of the car, the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber thick in the air. A choked gasp escaped Anna's lips. This time, she wouldn't turn away. She forced herself closer, the scene solidifying around her. Her daughter, Sarah, lay limp in the back seat, a single red shoe abandoned on the floor. A primal scream tore from Anna's throat, a raw echo of the pain she'd so desperately suppressed. But amidst the wreckage, a flicker of hope. Mark, her husband, was still conscious. His arm was pinned beneath the twisted metal, but his eyes met hers, a silent plea for her strength. "Anna," his voice rasped, "remember, love you, Sarah." His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the abyss of grief. She had to remember, not just the pain, but the love that fueled her. With a surge of adrenaline, she started scanning the car, searching for anything that could help. The library around her flickered, transforming into a twisted version of the car crash scene. Grotesque figures materialized, laughing, their voices echoing Mark's last words in a mocking way. Was this the labyrinth's attempt to break her again? But Anna wouldn't be deterred. Drawing strength from the fading image of Mark and Sarah, she focused on the task at hand. She spotted a crowbar wedged beneath the dashboard. The figures lunged, their touch cold and clammy. But fueled by a desperate love, Anna fought back. With each swing of the crowbar, a memory resurfaced. A picnic in the park, Sarah's first wobbly steps, Mark's gentle smile. The library walls shimmered, the figures dissolving into wisps of smoke. Finally, she reached Mark, freeing his arm. Together, they stumbled towards Sarah, a silent prayer on their lips. But the scene dissolved again, replaced by a blinding white light. A sterile hospital room materialized. Machines hummed in the background, and a doctor, his face etched with concern, stood beside her bed. "Anna," he said softly, "you've been in a coma for a month. We almost lost you." Relief flooded her. She wasn't alone. Mark and Sarah, a cold dread gripped her heart. The doctor's somber expression confirmed her fears. "Sarah," his voice faltered. "She didn't make it." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes, but this time, they were mixed with a fierce determination. She wouldn't forget. She wouldn't let Sarah's memory fade. As days turned into weeks, Anna battled the lingering effects of the accident and the trauma of her lost daughter. The therapy sessions were grueling, forcing her to confront the horrific memories she tried so desperately to erase. But with each painful recollection, a piece of her past, the love, the joy, the grief, reassembled. She embraced the pain, for it was a reminder of the life she cherished. One day, during a session, she remembered the experimental therapy. The doctor confirmed her suspicions, a radical treatment designed to erase traumatic memories. Thankfully, it hadn't been completely successful. As she recovered, Anna discovered a hidden journal, filled with Mark's entries chronicling their struggles and his unwavering love for her and Sarah. Tears streamed down her face as she read, his words a balm to her wounded soul. Slowly, her life began to take shape again. She found comfort in helping others who had suffered loss, sharing her story and the importance of remembering, even in the face of pain. The labyrinth of her mind wasn't conquered, but she had emerged, battered but not broken. She carried the scars of her past, but also the unwavering love for her daughter and the strength of her own resilience. One night, as Anna drifted off to sleep, she dreamt of a playground. A familiar giggle echoed in the air. Turning a corner, she saw a young girl with pigtails the color of spun sunshine. "Mommy?" the girl called out, her voice filled with childish joy. Anna reached out, a tear rolling down her cheek. The dream dissolved, leaving her with a bittersweet ache in her heart. Was it a memory, a figment of her imagination, or a glimpse of a future reunion? The house that breathed secrets. The Peterson family, John, Sarah, and their teenage son, Alex, arrived at Blackwood Manor on a blustery October afternoon. Inherited from a distant relative, the imposing Victorian mansion loomed before them, a Gothic silhouette against the leaden sky. Twisted branches clawed at the peeling paint, and countless shuttered windows seemed to stare down with vacant eyes. An unsettling silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the mournful cry of a lone crow circling overhead. John, ever the optimist, whistled a cheerful tune as he unloaded the U-Haul. Sarah, however, felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. The house exuded a palpable sense of wrongness, a whispered threat that sent chills down her arms. Unease settles in. The first night was a symphony of unsettling sounds. The wind howled like a tormented beast, rattling the ancient windows like skeletal fingers against glass. A low, rhythmic groan seemed to emanate from the very walls, growing in intensity with each passing hour. Sleep, when it finally came, was fractured with nightmares, swirling shadows and disembodied voices whispering chilling warnings. Morning brought little comfort. Objects vanished and reappeared in different locations. Doors creaked open of their own accord, revealing empty rooms and chilling drafts. Alex, usually glued to his phone, became withdrawn and jumpy. He swore he saw a fleeting shadow dart across the darkened hallway, its form dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The whispers begin. As the days turned into weeks, the occurrences became bolder. Unexplained whispers echoed from unseen corners, their intent malevolent, their words indistinct yet filled with a chilling malice. The air grew heavy, thick with the cloying scent of mildew and a faint, metallic tang. Sarah, once a woman of reason, found herself drawn to the attic, a dusty labyrinth of forgotten furniture and cobwebbed memories. In a forgotten corner, tucked away in a dusty trunk, she stumbled upon a leather-bound journal. The diary belonged to Eleanor Blackwood, the enigmatic relative who had left them the house. With trembling hands, Sarah delved into its brittle pages. The faded ink spoke of a woman consumed by grief and a desperate longing to connect with her deceased husband. Eleanor detailed a dark ritual performed within the house walls, a forbidden ceremony meant to breach the veil between the living and the dead. The journal entries grew increasingly frantic, filled with chilling descriptions of grotesque apparitions and unexplained phenomena. Eleanor spoke of whispers that drove men mad, of shadows that choked the life out of their victims. A cold dread filled Sarah as she reached the final entries. Eleanor had awakened a terrifying entity, something far more sinister than a loving husband's spirit. Filled with terror, Sarah learned the ritual was incomplete, and Eleanor had fled the house, leaving her dark legacy behind. The entity awakens. Desperate to share her discovery, Sarah raced downstairs, clutching the diary. John, however, remained skeptical. He dismissed Sarah's fears as a result of stress and overactive imagination. Alex, however, believed her. He, too, felt a constant sense of being watched, of unseen eyes following his every move. As the weeks morphed into months, the house became increasingly aggressive. Shadows writhed on the walls, morphing into grotesque shapes that resembled twisted parodies of humanity. The whispers grew louder, filled with a cacophony of torment and despair. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant low hum of unease that permeated the house like an oppressive fog. The investigation, determined to unravel the house's secrets, Sarah sought help. She contacted a local historian named Emily Thorne, a woman known for her expertise on the area's dark history. Emily listened intently to Sarah's account, her face etched with concern. She confirmed the chilling rumors surrounding Blackwood Manor, whispers of a vengeful spirit and a forbidden ritual that had gone horribly wrong. Together, Sarah and Emily scoured historical records and dusty archives, piecing together the tragic past of the house. They discovered Eleanor was not alone in her descent into madness. The original owner, a man named Silas Blackwood, had also dabbled in the occult. He perished in a fire that some believed to be an act of self-immolation, a desperate attempt to escape the entity he had unleashed. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Sarah and Emily decided to confront the entity head-on. They spent days scouring the house, searching for clues mentioned in the diary, a hidden room, a specific symbol, anything that could lead them to a way to banish the entity. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind, sent shivers down their spines. The ritual room. One evening, amidst the chaotic symphony of the house settling, a floorboard in the library creaked open, revealing a narrow, hidden staircase leading down into the darkness. Hope flared in Sarah's chest. This might be the answer they were looking for. With Emily close behind, Sarah descended the rickety steps, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. The damp smell of mildew intensified, tinged with a metallic tang that caused Sarah's throat to constrict. The passage opened into a small, circular room. The walls were lined with dusty books on arcane subjects and strange symbols scrawled in blood-red paint. In the center of the room, a sigil was etched onto the floor, radiating an unnatural heat. It matched the symbol described in Eleanor's diary, the key to completing the ritual and potentially banishing the entity. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah as she realized the implications. Completing the ritual might not be good either. What if it unleashed something even worse? Fear warred with determination within her. They had to try something. They couldn't just leave the house with a malevolent entity for company. As they studied the intricate symbols, a chilling voice echoed through the room, sending shivers down their spines. "Foolish mortals, you dare disturb my slumber." The voice was a cacophony of whispers, each one dripping with malice. A swirling mass of darkness materialized in the center of the room, taking the shape of a grotesque humanoid figure. Its eyes, burning embers in the gloom, fixated on Sarah and Emily. Sarah felt a primal fear grip her, but Emily, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "We know what you are," she declared, her voice surprisingly steady. "We know Eleanor's folly. We are here to end this." The entity laughed, a sound that scraped against their sanity. "End it? You cannot contain me. I am a part of this house, as much as the walls or the floorboards. You only aggravate me." A desperate plan formed in Sarah's mind. "We can help you," she lied, her voice trembling slightly. "We can free you, but we need your cooperation." The entity paused, its swirling form seeming to solidify for a moment. "Free me? How?" "The ritual," Sarah explained, pointing to the sigil on the floor. "It's incomplete. We can finish it together. Then you can finally be at peace." The entity remained silent for an agonizing moment. Then a flicker of something resembling hope flitted across its shadowy form. "Peace? You offer me peace?" "Yes," Sarah lied again, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We can send you on, wherever you belong." With a heavy heart, Sarah followed the instructions gleaned from Eleanor's diary. She gathered the necessary ingredients, herbs stolen from a forgotten cabinet, a tarnished silver chalice found buried beneath the floorboards, and a vial of viscous liquid that emanated an otherworldly stench. Following the intricate steps, she chanted the words from the diary, her voice cracking with anxiety. The room pulsed with an unnatural energy. The symbol on the floor glowed an intense red, and the entity writhed in a frenzy. Emily, ever the researcher, noticed something Sarah had missed. The ritual wasn't meant to banish, it was meant to bind. Sarah felt a cold dread pool in her stomach as the entity shrieked in fury. It wasn't being freed, it was being trapped within the confines of the house, its power tethered to the completed ritual. With a final, ear-splitting wail, the entity dissolved into a black mist that swirled around the room before being sucked into the glowing sigil. Silence descended, heavy and oppressive. The air grew cold, and Sarah felt a suffocating sense of wrongness settle over the room. They had stopped the entity, but at what cost? The aftermath. Exhausted and shaken, Sarah and Emily stumbled out of the hidden chamber. As they ascended the narrow stairs, the floorboards snapped shut behind them with a resounding click. They returned to the library, a heavy silence hanging in the air. John and Alex, alerted by the commotion, awaited their return, their faces etched with worry. Sarah and Emily, unable to speak, simply shook their heads. The entity was gone, but the house felt even more oppressive than before. A chilling draft blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. That night, sleep remained elusive. Every creak, every groan of the house, now felt sinister, a reminder of the entity they had trapped within its walls. In the morning, Sarah, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere any longer, declared they were leaving. John, relieved, readily agreed. Leaving the house proved easier said than done. Their phones displayed no signal, and the car, inexplicably, wouldn't start. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. Were they trapped? As if sensing their fear, the house seemed to groan, a low, mournful sound that sent shivers down their spines. John, ever the problem solver, tinkered with the car engine while Sarah and Emily huddled inside, trying to formulate a plan. Alex, usually glued to his phone, had become strangely withdrawn. He sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the overgrown grounds outside. Sarah noticed a flicker of fear in his eyes, a fear that wasn't there before. "Did you see something?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Alex flinched, startled from his reverie. "Just crows," he muttered, gesturing towards the window. "There are a lot of them. They seem to be watching us." Sarah peered out the window. Dozens of crows perched on the branches of the ancient oak trees surrounding the house, their black eyes gleaming like malevolent beads. Nightfall arrived, cloaking the house in an inky darkness. The oppressive silence was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of unseen claws against the window panes. Panic simmered within them. They couldn't stay, but leaving seemed impossible. Desperate for help, Emily remembered a local legend mentioned in her research, a hermit named Silas, rumored to live deep within the Blackwood woods bordering the property. Legend claimed Silas possessed a deep knowledge of the house and the dark secrets it held. Driven by desperation, they decided to seek out this hermit. The next morning, armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread, Sarah, Emily, and John ventured into the dense woods. The air hung heavy, the silence broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures and the snap of twigs under their feet. The forest seemed to twist and turn around them, disorienting and unnerving. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon a ramshackle hut nestled deep within the woods. A weathered old man with a long, tangled beard answered their knock. This was Silas, his eyes as dark and mysterious as the forest itself. Sarah, her voice trembling, explained their predicament and the entity trapped within the house. Silas listened intently, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You shouldn't have messed with what you don't understand," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "The house has always been a prison, not just for the entity, but for something darker, something far more ancient." He revealed a chilling truth. The entity was merely a guardian, trapped within the house to keep a more powerful evil at bay. Completing the ritual had not only weakened the entity but also disturbed the ancient barrier it maintained. A new threat, a wave of despair washed over Sarah. They had unleashed something far worse. Silas, however, offered a glimmer of hope. He spoke of a hidden chamber within the house, a chamber containing a powerful artifact, a talisman capable of repelling the ancient evil. He provided a cryptic map etched on a scrap of parchment, his instructions vague and ominous. With a heavy heart, the group returned to the house, the weight of their actions hanging heavy on their shoulders. Back inside, the oppressive atmosphere was even more pronounced. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and unseen things seemed to stir in the shadows. Determined to rectify their mistake, they set about searching for the hidden chamber. Days turned into weeks as they scoured the house, following the cryptic clues. They discovered hidden passages, dusty attics, and forgotten rooms. Alex, fueled by a newfound determination to escape the house's suffocating grip, proved surprisingly resourceful. His keen eye and youthful agility made him invaluable in their search. The hidden chamber, finally, guided by the faded markings on the map, they discovered a hidden door disguised as a bookshelf panel in the library. Behind the door lay a narrow, winding staircase descending deep into the bowels of the house. With a sense of trepidation, they ventured down, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. The passage opened into a large, circular chamber illuminated by a single, flickering torch. The walls were adorned with strange symbols and murals depicting horrifying creatures. In the center of the room, a stone pedestal held an ornately carved silver box, the talisman Silas mentioned. As they approached the pedestal, the air grew thick with a suffocating darkness. A rasping voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that sent chills down their spines and turned their blood to ice. "Foolish mortals, it hissed. "You have released me." A swirling mass of shadows materialized in the center of the room, taking the form of a monstrous creature with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. It was far more terrifying than the entity they had previously trapped. Sarah felt a primal fear grip her, but Emily, ever resourceful, lunged for the silver box. As she grasped the talisman, a surge of energy coursed through the room, the symbols on the walls glowing in intense white. The monstrous creature shrieked, its form writhing in agony. The air crackled with unseen power. Alex, fueled by a sudden surge of bravery, grabbed a dusty ceremonial dagger from a nearby alcove. With a desperate cry, he lunged at the creature, plunging the dagger into its inky heart. A deafening roar filled the chamber, followed by an ear-splitting crash as the creature dissolved into a swarm of black smoke. The smoke swirled towards the talisman in Emily's hand, as if drawn by an invisible force. With a final, chilling gurgle, the smoke was sucked into the silver box, and a blinding light engulfed the room. When the light subsided, they were left blinking in the dim glow of the torch. The air felt lighter, the oppressive darkness gone. Exhausted and emotionally drained, they stumbled back up the hidden staircase. The house, though still bearing the weight of its past, felt strangely peaceful. As they emerged into the library, they realized the crows that had been circling the house for days were gone. Leaving the house proved easier this time. The car started with a single turn of the key, and their phones miraculously picked up a signal. As they drove away, Blackwood Manor receded into the distance, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. They were free, but the scars of their encounter lingered. The house had taken a piece of them, a piece replaced by a chilling knowledge of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world. The twist. Weeks later, back in the safety of their own home, Sarah unpacked a box containing the remaining belongings from Blackwood Manor. Among the dusty trinkets and faded photographs, her eyes caught something glinting at the bottom, a small, tarnished mirror. Curiosity piqued. She picked it up. As she gazed into its reflective surface, a flicker of movement caught her eye. In the depths of the mirror, a faint image materialized, a woman with a knowing smile, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling familiarity. It was Eleanor Blackwood. A chilling voice whispered from the mirror, barely audible, "Foolish girl, you've merely released me." Sarah dropped the mirror in horror. It shattered on the floor, but the image of Eleanor remained etched in her mind, a chilling reminder that the house held more secrets than they had ever realized. The darkness might have been contained, but a new, more insidious threat had been awakened. The ending. Sarah left grappling with this horrifying realization. The house may be gone from sight, but its secrets and its darkness now cling to her, a constant reminder of the malevolent forces she unwittingly unleashed. The boy with porcelain eyes. Emily and David, a young couple yearning for a child, stumbled upon Ethan in a quiet orphanage nestled amidst rolling hills. He was a wisp of a boy, barely 8, with a mop of unruly brown hair and the most unsettling feature, eyes that seemed carved from polished porcelain. They were devoid of the usual warmth and depth of human eyes, replaced by an icy, vacant blue that sent shivers down Emily's spine. David, a pragmatic lawyer, dismissed her unease as nerves. "He's just an orphan, Em. Maybe a little lost," he said, his hand finding hers in a gesture of comfort. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about Ethan. Despite her initial apprehension, Emily found herself drawn to Ethan's quiet demeanor. When he smiled, a rare and fleeting occurrence, his whole face transformed, showcasing a vulnerability that melted her reservations. They adopted him that very day, eager to shower him with the love and care he so desperately needed. Their joy, however, was short-lived. Strange things began to happen soon after Ethan moved in. At first, they were subtle, misplaced objects, doors creaking open on their own, an unsettling feeling of being watched. Then the dolls arrived. Ethan seemed fixated on them. A dusty porcelain doll from a thrift store became his constant companion. He carried it everywhere, whispering secrets to its painted face and arranging its stiff limbs in elaborate poses. More dolls followed, each one more disturbing than the last. Some were missing limbs, their chipped porcelain revealing hollow insides. Others had vacant, button eyes that seemed to follow you around the room. As the collection grew, Ethan's behavior changed. He became withdrawn, speaking less and spending hours locked in his room, arranging the dolls in intricate tableaus. The dolls began to resemble the family: a miniature Emily, David, and even a smaller doll with unsettlingly familiar porcelain eyes. One night, Emily woke to a blood-curdling scream. Rushing to Ethan's room, she found him in a frenzy, surrounded by the dolls. The miniature Emily doll lay on the floor, its porcelain head shattered, a smear of red paint across its tiny chest. A wave of nausea washed over her as she noticed the glint of a sharp object in Ethan's hand, a shard of porcelain, perfectly mirroring the one embedded in the doll's chest. Ethan stared at her, his porcelain eyes reflecting a terrifying calmness. "I had to punish her," he said in a monotone voice, devoid of any emotion. "She was mean to me." Panic clawed at Emily's throat. This wasn't normal childhood behavior. Fear turned to a cold dread as she realized the dolls weren't just playthings. They were somehow connected to Ethan, reflecting his emotions, perhaps even amplifying them. David, initially skeptical of Emily's concerns, grew increasingly worried as the incidents became more frequent. Furniture would move on its own, and whispers, seemingly emanating from the dolls, filled the house at night. Then, one evening, David found a message scrawled in jagged letters on their bedroom mirror. "They will take you." Driven by desperation, Emily and David delved into Ethan's past. The orphanage offered little information, only confirming his arrival after a fire that claimed his entire family. A local legend whispered of a doll maker who practiced dark magic, crafting dolls imbued with the spirits of the dead. The fire, they said, consumed his workshop and everything inside. A horrifying possibility dawned on them. What if Ethan wasn't just an orphan? What if he was somehow connected to the deceased doll maker, his spirit residing in one of the dolls, influencing Ethan's actions? Desperate for help, they consulted a local historian, a wizened old woman named Miss Hawthorne. She listened intently to their story, her face grim. "The dolls," she rasped, her voice raspy with age. "They are vessels, not for spirits, but for the darkness within." Miss Hawthorne spoke of a ritual, a way to sever the connection between Ethan and the dolls. But the ritual required a sacrifice, an object of utmost importance, imbued with love and belonging. It was a gamble, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Emily knew what she had to do. On a moonless night, with David holding Ethan back, she stood before the collection of dolls. Clutching a worn teddy bear, a gift from her late mother, she began the ritual. The air crackled with unseen energy as Miss Hawthorne chanted in an ancient language. The dolls writhed, their painted faces contorting in a silent scream. A deafening crash resonated through the house. Ethan screamed, a chilling sound that tore at Emily's heart. When she opened her eyes, the room was bathed in an eerie blue light. The dolls were still, their vacant eyes locked on Emily. In Ethan's hand, the porcelain shard that mirrored the doll's wound had vanished. He looked at her, a flicker of emotion crossing his porcelain eyes, a chilling mixture of fear and rage. "You broke them," he whispered, his voice laced with a venom that sent shivers down Emily's spine. The air grew thick, a suffocating pressure pressing down on them. Then, a voice, cold and disembodied, echoed in the room. "Foolish mortals, you cannot sever the ties that bind." The voice seemed to emanate from all the dolls at once, a chorus of whispers that chilled them to the bone. It was then that Emily noticed a change in Ethan. His eyes, once a vacant blue, flickered with a malevolent intelligence. A cruel smile stretched across his lips, revealing sharp, pointed teeth that hadn't been there before. This wasn't the boy they had adopted, not anymore. This was something else, a dark entity using Ethan as a vessel. David lunged forward, grabbing Ethan's arm. But Ethan's strength was inhuman. He flung David across the room with a sickening thud. Terror clawed at Emily's throat. This was no longer a fight against dolls. It was a battle against an ancient evil unleashed. Desperately, she cast a glance at Miss Hawthorne, who stood trembling in the corner. The old woman met her gaze, a flicker of determination replacing the fear. With a shaky hand, she pointed a gnarled finger at a shelf across the room. On it, nestled amongst dusty books, lay a small, intricately carved wooden box. "The binding box," Miss Hawthorne croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "It holds the key to trapping the entity." Emily understood. The ritual might have failed to sever the connection, but it had weakened the bond. Now they had a chance to contain it, but reaching the box was a daunting task. Ethan, now fully possessed by the entity, stalked towards her with inhuman speed. His eyes, glowing with a malevolent blue light, burned into hers. Thinking fast, Emily snatched the teddy bear, her mother's love a tangible warmth in her hand. "This belonged to my mother," she shouted, her voice shaking. "It holds more love than anything you can possess." Ethan paused, his head tilting in curiosity. The entity, seemingly intrigued by the object, struggled for control. This was her chance. With a desperate lunge, Emily dashed towards the shelf, dodging shards of porcelain the possessed Ethan flung at her. She snatched the box, feeling a surge of energy flow through it as she held it tight. As she turned, the possessed Ethan was upon her. His porcelain face contorted into a grotesque mask of rage. But before he could reach her, Miss Hawthorne, with a sudden burst of strength, tripped him with her cane. The entity shrieked in fury, a sound that shook the very foundation of the house. With a desperate cry, Emily slammed the box shut, the carvings on its surface glowing with an ethereal light. A wave of energy pulsed through the room, throwing them all back. The dolls exploded in a shower of porcelain shards. The blue light dissipated, leaving behind a thick, oppressive darkness. When Emily dared to open her eyes, the room was silent. Ethan lay unconscious on the floor, his face pale and devoid of the malevolent intelligence it had held moments before. David, shaken but alive, crawled to her side. Miss Hawthorne, drained but triumphant, lay gasping for breath. The ordeal was over, but at a terrible cost. The dolls were destroyed, a chilling reminder of the darkness they had contained. They waited, a heavy silence hanging in the air, unsure if the entity had been truly contained or simply biding its time. Days turned into weeks, then months. Ethan remained in a coma, his porcelain eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The doctors were baffled, offering no explanation for his condition. Emily and David kept a constant vigil, their love for the boy they had adopted battling the fear of the entity that might still reside within him. One day, while reading a book to Ethan, Emily noticed a single tear roll down his cheek. It was a small miracle, a sign of life they hadn't dared to hope for. Soon, Ethan woke, a child again, confused and scared. He had no memory of the events that had unfolded or the entity that had possessed him. Relief washed over Emily and David, but the scars of their ordeal remained. They kept the box containing the entity hidden away, a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced. Ethan, too, carried a shadow within him, a haunted look in his eyes that mirrored the unsettling blue of the porcelain dolls. Years passed. Ethan grew into a young man, haunted by fragmented memories and nightmares of screaming dolls and a cold, blue light. He never fully recovered his early childhood innocence. Despite the therapy and love he received, a sliver of unease always lingered. He excelled in art, his drawings often depicting disturbingly realistic dolls with vacant eyes. Then, one day, while visiting the local museum with his art class, Ethan stumbled upon an exhibit on ancient artifacts. His gaze fell upon a collection of intricately carved wooden boxes, remarkably similar to the one his parents kept hidden away. A chill ran down his spine as he felt an unexplainable pull towards one particular box. As he leaned closer, the memory, long suppressed, flooded back the ritual, the dolls, the chilling voice. Panic seized him, and he stumbled back, the weight of the repressed trauma threatening to crush him. He confided in Emily, hesitant and scared, revealing the fragmented memories and the strange connection he felt to the box at the museum. Emily, her face pale, decided it was time to tell Ethan the truth. She revealed the horrifying events of his childhood, the entity that had possessed him, and the box that contained it. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he processed the story, a mixture of disbelief and horror washing over him. They decided to consult Miss Hawthorne, now a frail woman nearing the end of her life. When she saw Ethan, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "The entity," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "It feeds on darkness, on fear. The boy, he will be its target." These words filled Emily and David with dread. They knew they couldn't avoid the box at the museum forever. It was a ticking time bomb, a beacon for the entity trapped within their own box. A plan had to be formed, a way to permanently destroy the entity before it could possess Ethan again. Ms. Hawthorne revealed the final part of the ritual, a dangerous act that required Ethan to confront the entity within the museum box. He would need to be strong, to channel his own light to overpower the entity's darkness. It was a risky gamble, but it was their only hope. The night of the confrontation arrived, cloaked in an oppressive silence. Emily and David waited outside the museum, their hearts pounding against their ribs. Inside, Ethan stood before the box, his face etched with a mixture of fear and determination. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. A wave of icy coldness washed over him. The box contained nothing but a swirling vortex of black mist, pulsating with malevolent energy. From within, a chilling voice echoed, a chorus of the whispers he remembered from his childhood. "You cannot escape me, boy. You are mine." Ethan closed his eyes, focusing on the love of his parents, the warmth that had anchored him through the years. He remembered Miss Hawthorne's words, "Light conquers darkness." With a deep breath, he summoned his courage and unleashed a wave of pure, white light from within himself. The entity shrieked, its form writhing in agony as the light engulfed it. The museum echoed with the sound of its struggle, artifacts trembling on their shelves. Slowly, the entity weakened, shrinking into a tiny, pulsating ball of darkness. With a final burst of light, Ethan banished the entity. Silence descended, heavy and thick. He collapsed, drained but victorious. Dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Outside the museum, Emily and David rushed to his side, relief washing over them as they saw him alive and well. The ordeal had taken its toll. Ethan was left physically and emotionally drained, but the entity was gone. They sealed the museum box, a silent testament to the darkness they had faced. Though the threat was neutralized, a sense of vigilance remained. They knew the darkness, like a shadow, was always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to return. Ethan continued his art, his drawings now depicting not monsters, but beautiful landscapes bathed in warm sunlight. He never forgot the darkness he had faced, but he learned to channel his fear into a powerful force for good. He vowed to use his art to remind people of the power of love and light in the face of darkness. The story of the boy with porcelain eyes became a legend whispered amongst artists, a cautionary tale of the darkness that can lurk within beautiful things. It served as a reminder that courage, love, and a flicker of light can overcome even the most terrifying shadows. The Dollhouse Murders, a symphony of terror. Sarah, a writer perpetually drowning in rejection letters and dwindling savings, stumbled upon a curious package nestled amongst the usual bills and flyers on her doorstep. It was heavy for its size, and a shiver ran down her spine as she cradled it in her arms. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, lay a miniature replica of her own apartment. She gasped, staring at the tiny version of her messy living room, the chipped paint on the windowsill faithfully reproduced. Even the overflowing ashtray by the cluttered desk, a testament to her late-night writing sessions fueled by cheap coffee and despair, was recreated in miniature. But it was the figures inside the dollhouse that truly sent a jolt of terror through her. Tiny porcelain dolls, perfect replicas of Sarah and her grumpy landlord, Mr. Henderson, stood frozen in the miniature apartment. Their faces, with unsettlingly lifelike details, the faint lines around Mr. Henderson's eyes, the worry etched on Sarah's brow, seemed to hold a hidden malevolence. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Henderson's beady black eyes, mere dots of paint, were following her every move. That night, sleep was a stranger. Images of the dollhouse flickered behind her eyelids, replacing the comforting darkness with a miniature world filled with an unsettling sense of foreboding. In a fever dream, she heard tiny screams, a sickening thud echoing from within the dollhouse. She woke with a gasp, cold sweat clinging to her skin. The next morning, news reports confirmed her worst fears. Mr. Henderson was found dead in his apartment, a pool of crimson blooming around his head. The scene, a grotesque caricature, mirrored the one Sarah had witnessed in her dream. Panic choked her, a cold hand squeezing her heart. She raced back to the dollhouse, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The scene inside had shifted. The doll dressed in Mr. Henderson's trademark robe lay crumpled on the miniature living room floor, a tiny smear of red marring the pristine white floorboards. Days bled into weeks, each sunrise bringing a new scene of horror to the dollhouse. A spilled cup of coffee in the miniature apartment mirrored a broken mug in her own kitchen. A chipped tooth on the Sarah doll followed a trip and fall on her part. The lines between reality and the dollhouse began to blur. She'd flinch at phantom sounds from within the miniature house, finding herself reaching for a cup of coffee that wasn't there. The once comforting routine of her life became a twisted game played out by unseen hands. The dolls, silent observers, became her constant companions. Her fear intensified with each passing day. The once familiar creak of the floorboards sounded like tiny screams, and the flickering streetlights outside cast grotesque shadows that seemed to mimic the movements of the dolls. Despair gnawed at Sarah's sanity. Her rejection pile grew taller, mirroring the growing sense of hopelessness that threatened to consume her. The dollhouse had become an obsession, a grotesque reflection of her own life slowly unraveling. She started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting every detail, the changes in the dollhouse, the strange coincidences in her own life. One afternoon, a frantic pounding at the door jolted her from her obsessive scribbling. It was Mrs. Ramirez, the elderly woman from downstairs, her face a mask of terror. Mrs. Ramirez, a constant source of gossip and unwanted conversation, now spoke in hushed tones about a dark presence in the building, a feeling of suffocating dread that had descended ever since the strange package arrived. Sarah dismissed Mrs. Ramirez's ramblings at first, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was she imagining things? Was the dollhouse playing tricks on her mind? Or was something more sinister at play? The internet offered little solace. Obscure forums hinted at malevolent spirits trapped in objects, curses passed down through generations, and vengeful entities seeking retribution. None of it offered answers, only fueling the paranoia gnawing at Sarah's sanity. Desperate for answers, Sarah delved into the history of the building. Days were spent hunched over dusty microfilm at the library, piecing together a fragmented history of the tenement. She discovered the building had a dark past, rumored to be the site of a tragic fire that claimed several lives decades ago. The whispers spoke of a young dollmaker who perished in the flames, his collection of intricately crafted dolls lost forever. A chilling realization struck Sarah. The dollhouse, an exact replica of her apartment, was too perfect to be a random coincidence. Could it hold the key to the haunting? Could the dolls be somehow connected to the fire, to the dollmaker? Driven by a morbid curiosity and a desperate hope of breaking the curse, Sarah ventured into the dusty basement, the air thick with the smell of mildew and forgotten things. Armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the flickering beam revealing cobwebs clinging to exposed pipes and peeling paint revealing cryptic messages scrawled on the walls. A faint scratching sound, like tiny claws on concrete, sent shivers down her spine. The flashlight beam landed on a boarded-up doorway at the far end of the corridor. It was the only unexplored section, a dark, festering wound in the building's underbelly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Sarah knew she had to see what lay beyond. With trembling hands, she pried loose the rotting boards, revealing a hidden chamber. A wave of stale air, thick with the smell of burnt wood and something more sinister, washed over her. Inside, the room was illuminated by a single flickering bulb. Dust motes danced in the pale light, revealing a scene as if frozen in time. A workbench overflowing with half-finished dolls lay in the center, each one with unsettlingly lifelike features. A chair lay overturned beside it, and on the wall hung an assortment of delicately crafted dolls, their painted faces seeming to hold a silent scream. But what truly sent a jolt of terror through Sarah was the charred skeleton slumped in the corner, clutching a single, eerily familiar doll, a miniature version of the dollhouse itself. As Sarah stumbled back, the floorboard beneath her creaked, echoing through the chamber. A gust of wind, seemingly from nowhere, extinguished the bulb, plunging her into darkness. Panic seized her as she fumbled for the flashlight, the scratching sound growing louder, closer. Suddenly, a cold hand clamped over her mouth. A chilling whisper rasped in her ear. "Don't leave yet. The story's just getting started." The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the source of the voice. A doll. A grotesque replica of the dollmaker himself, his painted eyes burning with an unnatural malice. The miniature Sarah doll in the dollhouse mirrored the scene. A tiny hand clamped over its porcelain mouth. Sarah screamed, a primal cry of terror that echoed through the basement. In the chaos, she dropped the flashlight, the darkness engulfing her once more. She scrambled back, desperate to escape, but unseen hands grabbed her ankles, pulling her down. The world dissolved into a cacophony of sounds, her own ragged breaths, the chilling laughter of the dolls, the scratching that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, a sickening crunch, followed by a horrifying silence. Sarah awoke with a gasp, cold sweat clinging to her skin. She was back in her apartment, the morning sunlight filtering through the dusty window. Relief washed over her, so intense it bordered on euphoria. But as her eyes fell on the dollhouse, a wave of dread settled in her stomach. The scene inside had changed. The miniature Sarah doll lay on the floor of the dollhouse, its porcelain face cracked, a dark stain spreading across its chest. The dollmaker doll was gone, replaced by a scene that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The miniature Sarah stood poised with a tiny knife, a replica of the one Sarah kept under her pillow. The knife was pointed at the miniature Mr. Ramirez, the elderly woman from downstairs, his tiny porcelain face contorted in a silent scream. Sarah knew then that the nightmare wasn't over. It had simply taken a new form. She was trapped in a twisted game, forced to watch as the dolls enacted their macabre plans. The only way to break the curse, she realized with chilling certainty, was to play by their rules. Days turned into weeks, each morning revealing a new scene of impending doom in the dollhouse. Sarah, driven to desperation, sought help from anyone who would listen: eccentric antique dealers, occult figures lurking in the fringes of society, anyone who might offer a glimmer of hope. But the answers remained elusive. Each encounter only confirmed the chilling truth. She was the target, the dollhouse a macabre puppet show leading to her inevitable demise. Yet, amidst the despair, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She wouldn't be a pawn in their twisted game. One night, fueled by a potent concoction brewed by a shadowy figure she found on the dark web, Sarah stood before the dollhouse. The miniature Sarah doll mirrored her stance, a determined glint in its painted eyes. "I won't be your puppet," Sarah declared, her voice hoarse with determination. "This ends now." As she spoke, an ancient incantation rose to her lips. The words gleamed from dusty tomes and whispered secrets. The room grew cold, the shadows dancing on the walls as the power of the ritual crackled in the air. The dolls within the house writhed, their painted faces contorting in silent screams. The miniature Sarah doll in the dollhouse raised its tiny hand, mimicking Sarah's movements, and the two figures chanted in unison, their voices echoing eerily in the small space. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lights and plunging them into darkness. A cold, spectral hand clamped over Sarah's shoulder, its touch sending shivers down her spine. A raspy voice, ancient and filled with malice, whispered in her ear. "You cannot defy fate, child. The game is afoot, and you are but a player." Fear threatened to consume her, but Sarah pushed forward, fueled by a desperate hope. "I choose my own fate," she gritted out, channeling every ounce of her will. As she spoke, a blinding light erupted from the dollhouse, momentarily banishing the darkness. Sarah shielded her eyes, then peeked through her fingers to witness a sight that stole her breath away. Inside the dollhouse, the miniature figures were locked in a struggle. The dollmaker doll, his face twisted in rage, grappled with a spectral figure that resembled a young boy, his form shimmering like smoke. It was the spirit of the deceased dollmaker, trapped and bound to the dolls he had created. The spectral boy reached for the miniature Sarah doll, his touch causing it to glow with an ethereal light. Then, with a final, heart-wrenching cry, the boy and the doll merged. The blinding light subsided, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. The dollhouse remained open, the miniature Sarah doll now a perfect replica of the spectral boy, its eyes filled with a newfound peace. Sarah cautiously reached out a finger, touching the miniature boy's porcelain face. A warmth bloomed where her finger met the cold porcelain, and a sense of calm washed over her. The spectral touch on her shoulder was gone. The next morning, news broke that a young boy's remains had been discovered during construction work near the building. The boy, it seemed, had been a talented dollmaker who perished in a fire decades ago. The story resonated with Sarah, a chilling confirmation of the truth she had unearthed. The dollhouse remained, a constant reminder of the ordeal, but the scenes within no longer depicted impending doom. Instead, they showed the boy, his miniature form now infused with a gentle warmth, playing with the other dolls, a smile gracing his porcelain face. The curse was broken, but Sarah was forever changed. The experience had left its mark, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. Yet, within the darkness, she had discovered a flicker of light, the courage to face her fears and the resilience of the human spirit. As she continued writing, her stories no longer reflected the despair of rejection letters. They now held a newfound depth, a touch of the unsettling that resonated with a raw, primal fear. The world may not have been ready for her genius before, but her brush with the darkness had forged her into a storyteller unlike any other. The dollhouse, a symbol of horror, had become her muse, a reminder that the greatest stories often reside in the shadows, waiting to be unearthed. Haunts of Camp Evergreen. The rusting gate groaned as Sarah pushed it open, the sound echoing through the overgrown clearing. Camp Evergreen, once a haven of childhood summers, lay before them, a spectral silhouette against the twilight sky. Vines snaked across rickety cabins, their windows like vacant eyes staring back. A chilling wind whispered through the skeletal remains of a once proud flagpole, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories. Sarah, Ben, Emily, and Max, all in their early 20s, had been inseparable since their days at Camp Evergreen. Now, years later, they'd come on a nostalgic weekend trip, a desperate bid to recapture a carefree time long gone. Each carried their own baggage, silent shadows cast by past mistakes. Sarah, the once outgoing leader, had a weary edge to her eyes. Ben, the jokester, seemed to force his laughter. Emily, the quiet observer, hugged her knees tightly, a tremor in her hands. And Max, ever the adventurer, masked a nervous energy with a restless gait. The cabins were worse inside. Dust motes danced in the dying light filtering through boarded windows. Cobwebs draped furniture like ghostly shrouds. A sense of unease settled like a shroud around them as they unpacked their meager supplies. "Remember capture the flag?" Ben said, trying to lighten the mood, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Yeah," Sarah forced a smile. "And the epic snowball fights in winter camp?" Memories, once joyful, now felt laced with a strange sense of foreboding. As darkness descended, they gathered around a sputtering fire in the central pavilion, the crackling flames casting grotesque shadows on the peeling paint. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Max scoffed. "Come on, it's just your imagination." But even he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into them from the surrounding woods. A loud snap, like a twig breaking, sent shivers down their spines. Ben pointed a shaky flashlight beam towards the source of the sound. Nothing. Yet the feeling of unseen eyes remained. They spent the night huddled around the fire, sleep a fleeting visitor plagued by nightmares of stalking shadows. Morning arrived, tinged with a chilling mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. As they started their hike to the old swimming lake, they discovered a single, blood-stained arrow protruding from the decaying sign that marked the trail. Fear tightened its grip around their hearts. Sarah, ever the leader, tried to maintain a facade of composure, but her voice betrayed a growing fear. The hike turned into a desperate scramble. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent them scrambling for cover. They reached the lake, an empty shell of its former glory, its water stagnant and opaque. Another arrow, this one tipped with a dark, unrecognizable substance, lay embedded in the rotting wooden dock. Panic surged through them. Their idyllic getaway had become a twisted nightmare. Back at the camp, they found the remaining cabins ransacked, their meager supplies gone. A single word, scrawled in dripping red paint across the mess hall wall, sent ice through their veins. "Remember." Sarah, remembering something from their counselor days, led them to the old counselor's cabin, a small, isolated structure at the edge of the campgrounds. Inside, they found a dusty box filled with faded photographs and news clippings. It was all there, the story of the camp counselor who had gone missing years ago, accused of cruel pranks and suspected abuse by the children under his care. The news clippings spoke of a search that yielded nothing, then of a chilling discovery. The counselor's body found deep in the woods, brutally murdered with arrows tipped with a toxic concoction brewed from poisonous mushrooms. The killer was never found, the case left unsolved. As the pieces fell into place, the fear morphed into a different kind of terror. They were being stalked by a vengeful spirit, a twisted embodiment of their childhood fear and resentment towards the missing counselor. They understood now why they had been targeted. This wasn't just a random attack. It was a twisted game of revenge. Suddenly, a guttural scream tore through the clearing. Emily. They found her outside her cabin, lifeless, an arrow protruding from her chest, the strange poison turning her skin an unnatural shade of green. Grief and terror choked them, but there was no time for mourning. They had to get out of there alive. Sarah, using her knowledge of the camp layout, devised a plan. They would use the old canoe from the lake to reach the river at the far end of the campgrounds. It was a risky gamble, but their only chance. As they pushed the canoe into the stagnant water, a figure emerged from the trees. It was tall and skeletal, dressed in tattered remnants of what might have once been a counselor's uniform. Its face was obscured by a tangled mess of hair and a mask fashioned from a crudely stitched animal skull. The smell of decay wafted from it, a horrifying confirmation of the twisted spirit inhabiting the body. The figure let out a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to claw its way from the grave, and charged towards them. Adrenaline surged through their veins. Max, ever the athlete, grabbed a broken paddle and braced himself at the front of the canoe. Ben, his fear momentarily replaced by a surge of protectiveness, grabbed a rusty fire iron from their meager supplies. Sarah gripped the oar with white-knuckled desperation, pushing with all her might. The chase was a blur of terror. The figure, fueled by vengeance, was relentless, its inhuman speed barely hindered by the uneven terrain. Max blocked a swipe of the spirit's clawed hand with the broken paddle, the wood splintering in a shower of fragments. Ben, eyes wide with fear, lunged at the approaching figure, thrusting the fire iron into its shoulder. It let out a piercing shriek, a sound that seemed to curdle the air. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air, momentarily distracting them. But the spirit, though wounded, continued its pursuit. Panic rose in Sarah's throat as they reached the riverbank. The water was murky and slow-moving, barely a trickle compared to the frantic pace of their pursuer. Working together in a desperate ballet of fear and survival, they managed to heave the canoe into the water. Sarah shoved them off with a final, earth-moving push. The canoe bobbed precariously as they scrambled inside. Sarah, her muscles screaming in protest, took up the oars. The current, sluggish as it was their only ally. They paddled with all their might, the sound of their desperate breaths filling the silence that followed the spirit's frustrated roar. They didn't dare look back. Every rustle of leaves, every dip in the water, sent shivers down their spines. Time seemed to stretch into infinity, each stroke of thee or an eternity. Doubt gnawed at them. Would the current be enough? Would they outrun the relentless spirit? As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, a sliver of hope emerged. In the distance, they saw signs of civilization. A faint plume of smoke rising from a farmhouse nestled amongst the trees. With renewed vigor, they paddled towards it, their hearts pounding with a desperate hope. Just as the last rays of sunlight faded, they reached the bank. Scrambling out of the canoe, they collapsed onto the damp earth, gasping for breath. They didn't dare celebrate their escape. Their eyes darted around frantically, searching for the vengeful spirit. A loud scream from behind shattered their fragile peace. They turned to see the figure emerge from the trees, its rage burning in its vacant eyes. But before it could launch its attack, a shotgun blast shattered the twilight. An elderly farmer, his face etched with a mixture of shock and anger, stood on the porch of his farmhouse. The smoking barrel of his gun pointed at the retreating figure of the spirit. The spirit let out a final, ear-splitting shriek before disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The farmer approached them cautiously, his eyes taking in their disheveled state. In a gruff voice, he asked, "What in tarnation happened out there?" Sarah, her voice hoarse, managed to stammer out a broken account of their ordeal. The farmer listened patiently, his face grim. When she finished, he shook his head sadly. "That camp," he muttered, "always held a darkness. Poor souls." He took them inside his farmhouse, offering them warmth, food, and a much-needed respite. As the fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, Sarah, Ben, and Max recounted their past. The childhood pranks and petty resentments that seemed so insignificant now. Shame mingled with their grief for Emily, a reminder of the unintended consequences of their actions. The police arrived the next morning, alerted by the farmer. They searched the campgrounds but found no trace of the spirit or any physical evidence of their encounter. The story Sarah and her friends shared was dismissed as a drug-induced hallucination. But they knew better. The scars, both physical and mental, remained as a chilling reminder of their horrifying weekend getaway. They left Camp Evergreen a changed group. The carefree spirit of their youth was gone, replaced by a deep-seated understanding of the fragility of life and the weight of their past. Their encounter with the vengeful spirit served as a harsh lesson. Sometimes, the shadows of the past can return, twisted and monstrous, demanding a reckoning for forgotten sins. It was a story they would carry with them, a chilling reminder that in the bright light of day, they couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes still watched them. A chilling reminder that the horrors of Camp Evergreen might not be entirely over. Watchman's Duty, a night of horror at Blackwood. The iron gates of Blackwood Asylum loomed like a skeletal grin against the inky night sky. Rain lashed against them, a relentless drumming that mirrored the nervous rhythm of John's heart. Tonight was his first night on the graveyard shift at Blackwood, a place whispered about in hushed tones around town. John, a man more comfortable fixing leaky faucets than facing the unknown, took a deep breath and pushed open the gate. Blackwood wasn't a modern facility with sterile walls and fluorescent lights. It was a hulking Victorian mansion, its grandeur long consumed by neglect. Ivy crawled up its cracked facade like skeletal fingers, and the windows, once grand, were boarded shut except for a few sparse squares of flickering gaslight. John fumbled with his keys, the metal cold and damp in his clammy hands. The lock groaned in protest as he finally pushed open the heavy oak door. A stale, fetid air assaulted him, a cocktail of dust, mildew, and something far more unsettling, a metallic tang that sent a shiver down his spine. The dim glow of his flashlight barely pierced the gloom. The cavernous main hall stretched before him, its high ceiling lost in shadows. John swallowed, the enormity of the place wrapping a suffocating silence around him. His supervisor, a gaunt man named Mr. Crowley with eyes that seemed to hold forgotten horrors, had briefed him earlier. "Just patrol the grounds, John," he had rasped. "Keep an eye on the security cameras, that's all. Don't go poking around you don't need to." John gripped his flashlight tighter, Mr. Crowley's cryptic warning hanging heavy in the air. The security room was a cramped space at the back of the hall. Its only occupant was a dusty old monitor with a dozen flickering black and white squares, the asylum's eyes. John settled into the creaking chair, the faint hum of the monitor a constant in the oppressive silence. The feeds were mostly unremarkable. Empty hallways, flickering lights, cobwebbed corners. But then, on camera 5, something caught his eye. The ward. It was a large, high-ceilinged room with barred windows. In the flickering light, John saw figures huddled in the shadows, skeletal forms wrapped in tattered blankets. They seemed to be rocking back and forth, a silent, unsettling chorus. But one figure stood apart, tall and gaunt, its back to the camera. Its head was cocked at an unnatural angle, seemingly staring straight into the lens. The hairs on John's neck prickled. He zoomed in, trying to focus on the solitary figure. But just as he did, the screen flickered, and the ward went dark. John's heart hammered in his chest. Was it a technical glitch, or something more? He checked the other cameras, but they all seemed normal. Unease gnawed at him, a feeling that something wasn't right. Determined to investigate, John grabbed his flashlight and a heavy metal pipe he found propped in the corner, a makeshift weapon against his better judgment. He approached the ward door with trepidation. The rusty hinges screamed in protest as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the silent corridors. The air inside the ward was thick and heavy, the smell of decay even stronger here. John's flashlight beam danced across empty cots and overturned tables. The figures he'd seen on the camera were nowhere to be found. He approached a row of padded cells, their metal doors hanging open like macabre smiles. Each cell was dark and silent, except for the one at the very end. A soft, rhythmic scratching sound emanated from the cell. John held his breath and cautiously peered inside. In the dim light, he saw a figure hunched over on the floor, its back to him. It was thin and skeletal, its long hair matted and caked with filth. As John got closer, the scratching stopped. The figure slowly turned its head, and John froze. There were no eyes in its sockets, just hollow pits that seemed to stare into his soul. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin that revealed rows of jagged teeth. A guttural growl ripped from its throat, a sound that sent a wave of terror crashing over John. He turned and ran, his legs pumping like pistons. He didn't stop until he burst back into the security room, slamming the door shut behind him. He collapsed into his chair, chest heaving. The horrifying image of the creature burned into his mind. He frantically flipped through the camera feeds, but the ward remained shrouded in darkness. As John tried to catch his breath, a new sound reached his ears, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere within the building. It seemed to be getting closer, the voices growing louder and more distorted with every passing second. John was trapped, a fly caught in a web of unimaginable horror. The chanting grew closer, echoing through the vast halls of Blackwood. John huddled deeper into his chair, his flashlight beam casting a small circle of feeble light in the encroaching darkness. The chanting was no longer human. It was a cacophony of guttural growls and rasping whispers that sent shivers down his spine. Suddenly, a flicker on camera 6 caught his eye. It was the corridor outside his security room. Panic surged through him as he saw a dark figure shambling towards the door, its silhouette grotesque and inhuman. John scrambled to his feet, his makeshift weapon clutched in his sweating hands. The chanting stopped. An agonizing silence descended, broken only by John's ragged breaths. He braced himself against the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, a blood-curdling thud echoed through the hall. The door splintered inwards, a grotesque claw ripping through the wood. A figure emerged from the broken doorway, It was the creature from the cell, but somehow even more horrific. Its once gaunt frame bulged with an unnatural musculature. Its skin stretched taut over pulsating veins. Its eyes, two burning points of malevolent red, locked onto John. John screamed and swung his pipe with all his might, connecting with the creature's shoulder. The metal buckled, but the blow seemed to have no effect. The creature let out a roar that shook the room, its razor-sharp claws flashing in the dim light. John stumbled back, tripping over debris as he desperately searched for another escape route. There was none. The windows were boarded shut. The door lay in splinters at his feet. He was cornered, a helpless prey in the jaws of a nightmare. With a terrifying speed, the creature lunged. John raised his pipe in a futile attempt to defend himself, but it was swatted aside like a twig. Pain exploded in John's leg as the creature's claws ripped through his flesh. He screamed, a primal cry of agony and terror. The creature, its red eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure, raised a claw for the final blow. But then, a new sound filled the air. A high-pitched, shrill scream, unlike anything John had ever heard. It pierced the silence like a knife, momentarily distracting the creature. It turned its head towards the source of the sound, a flicker of confusion in its burning eyes. John, seizing the opportunity, lunged towards the creature's side and shoved. The beast, caught off guard by the sudden movement, stumbled back and slammed into the wall with a sickening thud. It roared in anger, but before it could recover, John had scrambled through the broken doorway and into the dark hallway beyond. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get away. He ran blindly through the labyrinthine corridors of Blackwood, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. The creature's enraged roars echoed behind him, spurring him on. He burst through a heavy door, the sound crashing behind him. He found himself in a dusty library, rows of ancient books lining the walls. Moonlight filtered through a skylight high above, casting an eerie glow on the room. John collapsed behind a massive oak desk, his chest heaving and his vision blurring. He wasn't sure how long he lay there, but the sound of the creature's roars seemed to fade eventually, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a scream itself. John cautiously peeked out from behind the desk, peering into the dark hallway. There was no sign of the creature, but something else had taken its place. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, bathed in the pale moonlight. It was tall and slender, draped in a tattered white gown that shimmered like a phantom's shroud. Long white hair cascaded down its back, and its face was obscured by shadows. Despite the chill in the air, John felt a wave of warmth emanate from the figure. A sense of peace, a strange sense of safety settled over him. He rose slowly to his feet, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice raw from screaming. The figure tilted its head, and in a voice that sounded like a mournful sigh, whispered, "This place holds many horrors, John, but it also holds those who seek solace." The figure extended a skeletal hand towards him. John hesitated, a war of fear and hope raging inside him. Finally, with a trembling hand, he reached out and took it. The world around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and darkness. When John opened his eyes again, he found himself back in the security room, the flickering glow of the monitor the only source of light. He looked down at his hand. The gash from the creature's attack was gone, no trace of the horrific ordeal remaining. He checked the cameras. The ward was still shrouded in darkness, but the chanting wasn't coming from anywhere. He sat there, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Was it all a nightmare? Had the stress of the night finally snapped his sanity? Suddenly, a flicker on camera 9 caught his eye. It was the library. His heart lurched in his chest. He zoomed in, focusing on the spot where the figure had stood. There, bathed in the moonlight, was a single white rose, its petals perfect and unblemished. A cold shiver ran down John's spine. The rose wasn't there before. It was a sign, a confirmation that the encounter wasn't a dream. But what did it mean? Who was the figure and what solace did they offer? As John pondered these questions, The sky outside started to lighten, the faint glow of dawn painting the horizon. Relief washed over him. He had survived the night, but the horrors of Blackwood had left an indelible mark on his soul. The rest of his shift was uneventful. Mr. Crowley arrived just as the sun was rising, his face etched with a weary concern. John didn't mention the creature or the figure. He simply said the night had been quiet, a lie that stuck in his throat like sandpaper. Leaving Blackwood at sunrise felt surreal. The air outside seemed fresh and vibrant, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness within. John drove away, his mind replaying the events of the night. He knew he couldn't stay at Blackwood. The place was a vortex of fear, and he was no longer the naive man who had stepped through its gates. Days turned into weeks, then months. John quit his job at Blackwood, finding solace in the mundane routine of his old life. Yet the memories refused to fade. He dreamt of the creature, its red eyes burning into his soul. He dreamt of the figure, the white rose a beacon in the darkness. One night, he woke up from a nightmare, drenched in sweat. The image of the library flashed in his mind, and with a sudden clarity, he knew what he had to do. He needed to understand. John returned to Blackwood, not as a watchman, but as a researcher. He delved into the asylum's forgotten records, piecing together its dark history. He discovered that the figure was the spirit of a former doctor, a kind soul who had dedicated his life to healing the patients instead of tormenting them like the rest. The white rose was a symbol of his compassion, a reminder that even amidst the darkness, there was a flicker of humanity. The creature, however, was a manifestation of the asylum's cruelty and despair, a terrifying entity born from the suffering of countless souls. John learned that the figure could not stop the creature, but offered solace and guidance to those trapped within its clutches. This knowledge brought a strange sense of peace. He wasn't just a witness to horror. He had inadvertently become a part of Blackwood's story. He started visiting the library regularly, leaving a single white rose every time. It became a ritual, a way to honor the doctor's memory and offer a silent prayer for those forever trapped within the asylum's walls. Blackwood continued to operate, a dark monument to the past. But through John's visits, a tiny flicker of hope remained. The white rose, a symbol of resilience amidst the shadows, became a secret known only to him and the spirit within the library.